Hi, I'm Aaron Halimi, the founder and president of Renewable Properties. What's the deal with the one big, beautiful bill that the House of Representatives recently passed? As you know, I covered the proposed bill 2 weeks ago, and a lot has changed since that initial proposal to what the House recently passed. So let me cover those high points. What ended up getting passed late at night, a little over a week ago, ended up being worse than what we were all hoping for. As I mentioned before, now's the time for the big negotiation in the Senate. While we had all hoped for a better starting point, it's still a starting point. And I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll get the wins we need for the U.S. to remain energy dominant. The Senate is publicly targeting their version of the bill passed by the 4th of July. But given the variety of opinions and competing priorities, some believe that an August date is a more reasonable time frame. We'll see how fast this all comes together soon enough. As I did in my last post, my take here is going to be limited to impacts on utility and community solar. There's no doubt some really big setbacks for the broader energy transition, with cuts to residential solar, electric vehicles, and green hydrogen, to name a few. All right, here we go. The three major provisions that change key aspects of the IRA as it relates to solar. The ITC phase out, pushing the current phase out of the ITC up from 2034 to a requirement that projects must be under construction within 60 days of this bill's enactment and placed in service by the end of 2028. Effectively, you will need to start construction within 60 days of the bill being signed into law by the president and placed in service by 12/31/2028. That is a much shorter window for the ITC with no step down or phase out. Assuming you're utilizing an ITC safe harbor strategy here, which is definitely what we're doing at Renewable Properties, you basically have to be placed in service by the end of 2028, which is a drastic change to the original phase-out timeline in the IRA. Next change, placed in service language. The other nuance here is that the phase-out is tied to being placed in service as opposed to construction start. Now, that's a big hit, because things are out of your control when it comes to construction and specifically with dealing with utility interconnection. That's why construction start has typically been used as the milestone for prior phase outs of the ITC, and this is something that we'll need to revise in the Senate's version. The existing law regarding the phase down period applied to projects starting construction, i.e., if you started construction in 2033, you'd receive 100% of that ITC, and if in 2034, you'd receive 75%, etc. The bill amends that phase out and ties it to the year the projects are placed in service and removes the step down period and makes it a full stop and or cliff in 2028. It's not ideal for the market at large, and it's certainly not ideal for large utility scale developers that could be exposed on existing PPAs with delivery dates in those years or years beyond 2028. This is something that the industry should fight for, and we should fight for hard. We should also get it because it's precedent that reverting to construction start is not only fair, but reasonable. The last piece, which this was in here before as well, but I'm going to cover it anyway, is the foreign entity of concern provisions. And again, this is the single biggest issue in the bill for the renewables market. But if the House version doesn't change much, it might not be applicable. Reason being, right now, it's coming into play for projects that start construction after January 1st, 2026. So obviously, you would safe harbor your projects in advance of 2026. When you take that provision in conjunction with the current ITC phase-out language, that provision requires you to start construction within 60 days of the bill coming into law anyway. So again, if the version of the House bill actually holds, the foreign entity of concern provision is less meaningful. As we all know, we don't want the House version of the bill to hold. We want the Senate to amend it, and we want to get additional runway for the ITC. And if so, we're also going to need to edit the foreign entity of concern language because as currently drafted, it's not going to work. The language effectively prohibits a foreign entity or foreign ownership of materials to be sourced by entities like China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea. You're effectively going to be ineligible for the ITC if any component or subcomponent of your project is tied to China. That's really hard to document, let alone to track and execute on in today's supply chain. And so, again, we believe that this provision needs to be reworked substantially. There is some exemption language in the bill, but again, it's very narrow. And so we need something that's a little bit clearer and more reasonable. Not to mention, we don't want some ambiguity in this bill that then leads to a multi-year process of the Treasury providing guidance. Now, the one piece of good news coming from the proposed bill to the version of the House bill that was approved was regarding changes around transferability to the ITC. The original proposal actually had a phase out of transferability, whereas the version that got passed by the House doesn't touch or impact transferability. So that was a win. While it was a win, we still had a couple hits along the way. And in short, a lot has changed from the original proposal that the Ways and Means Committee suggested relative to what the House actually passed. And those changes were not good for the industry. Now the focus is on the Senate and hope that we realize that there's no way for the U.S. to meet its electricity needs without cost-effective solar and storage. We have some work to do to make this reconciliation bill more reasonable, and now's the time to get involved. Lobby through the trade associations, advocate to your senators, and do all in your power to ensure America can continue its energy dominance, which doesn't exist without renewables. And that's what's the deal.